today's, you will have been receiving all the statistics about the scale of this disaster in the last few weeks, so I really wanted to emphasize some of my own personal reflections about what we're seeing, and particularly the impact of this flood on children themselves. As you know, more than 1 million people across Borno state have been impacted by this flash flood, with a hearing of 400,000 people being displaced. 300,000 of those have ended up in 26 displacement camps, and you saw me reporting on Friday from Bekasi camp, which is one of the largest of those. The conditions there are really tough for children in particular. There's overcrowding, there's a lack of basic services and shelter, and as I said in the video, really food and water is in very much short supply. So we have some really challenging situations for children to deal with on the ground there, despite the very best efforts of everyone to scale up the response. As you can imagine, 300,000 people living in 26 overcrowded camps. As our primary concern at the moment is the short-term needs for food, water, shelter for children and their families living in those situations, as well as supporting children who've been separated from their families. One of the most distressing things that I saw in Bekasi camp was around 20 children who have been separated from their families, we are making our best efforts with other agencies on the ground to try to reunify those children with their family members, to try to identify where their families may have been relocated to. And that's going to be a strong focus for our child protection team in the coming weeks, is to support those children who've been separated, who are unaccompanied, and try to provide appropriate care for them as we try to retrace their families. Again, I've been working in this sort of humanitarian sector for more than 20 years. I have to say it was still shocking to me to see the overcrowding on the ground, the muddy conditions underfoot, and the lack of resources, the lack of services that are in those camps. In the longer term, and even in the next few days and weeks, we are very concerned about the potential for disease outbreaks in those kinds of conditions. There's lots of standing water in the camps. There are very few latrines available for children and families to use, given the very large numbers that those schools and other sites are now accommodating. So you can imagine the situation on the ground. What I saw was overcrowded latrines, and a lot of evidence of open defecation where people are having no access to latrines, and therefore, like I say, real risk of disease outbreaks. And we've heard in recent days of the first few cases of acute watery diarrhea and cholera. We are also hearing of the need for, again, to provide bed nets so that we can protect children and their families from the potential for malaria outbreaks. I think the other thing I wanted to emphasize is this is really a crisis upon a crisis. The children in Maiduguri that we have been working with and supporting over the last few years were already in a very vulnerable state in many cases. And again, I'll emphasize, Save the Children has been working in Nigeria since 2001. We've had this operation in Borno state since 2014, since the beginning of the crisis. And initially, of course, the crisis was based on addressing the needs of conflict-affected displaced populations. And it was conflict originally that displaced many people into Maiduguri. And we've had a very large operation in MMC and Jere LGAs over the last many years in order to support children's education, their child protection needs, health and nutrition needs. And so this flood now, and the flash flood which affected people so severely, has really forced many of those people who have been displaced once by conflict to now be displaced a second time into these temporary camps. So we are very concerned about the levels of vulnerability of those children in particular. The second reason why we're calling this a crisis upon a crisis is that this flood has occurred in the middle of the lean season. So already Save the Children was dealing with very large numbers of malnourished children in Borno State. This is the height of the lean season, when families' access to good nutrition is at its lowest point in between the harvest seasons. And therefore, again, we're particularly concerned about the impact on malnourished and underweight children of now being displaced, of now being living in these very challenging conditions in the camps. So for me, it was a very much a worrying visit. It was pleasing in many ways to see the speed with which we have been able to scale up our response, the leadership being shown by the Borno State government, the coordination between the actors on the ground was all impressive to see. But the conditions for children are dire, and we are really wanting to draw attention to the impact of the crisis, the need for more resources, the need for a stronger coordination, and the need to scale up those initial emergency life-saving interventions that Save the Children and others are implementing across the board. So let me stop there. I would be happy to share with you more reflections, but open this up for questions and answers from each of you. And let me just sort of end by saying, for Save the Children, like I say, we have around 200 staff on the ground already who are working with other partners to scale up our response. In the coming weeks, we will continue to respond as best we can under the coordination of the Borno State government. We're working together with the UN, with other international NGOs. I myself am meeting tomorrow with the Humanitarian country team, of which Save the Children is a member, so we will be working with all the heads of UN agencies, with the UN Humanitarian Coordinator and country directors of other agencies to try to bring together our best efforts, to bring together our resources to save as many lives as possible in this situation and to ensure the safety and protection of children in this crisis situation. If I can quote the Borno State Governor, when we met with him last week, he described this as the most massive acute disaster the state has experienced. I know many of the recent reports have talked about the worst floods in 30 years. He was actually saying this is the worst in living memory. And again, just our sympathies are with everyone across Borno State. And I hope that by bringing our resources together, we can really respond at scale and in a timely way to minimize the loss of life and to protect children who are currently experiencing crisis. Thank you. Let me stop there, and happy to open up to any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank